So you want to jump high, yeah? You want to dunk? You want to get over the rim? 40, 50-inch vertical? That's cool, man. I want to do that too. But here's the thing. If we cannot land, we will get injured. If we get injured, we can't train, right? The biggest obstacle to us training to jump higher is having to take training breaks because we get injured. And the biggest reason we get injured, whether we realize it or not, is ground interactions, whether our foot hitting the ground in some sort of a way. And the biggest ground interaction we need to deal with as jumpers is landing. Now, if we're really bad at landing, we might have a knee explosion or an ankle explosion. A sprained ankle or a torn ACL from landing. That's usually not how it works though. Our landing mechanics are just bad. Not so bad we get a huge injury, but bad enough that we're sore in weird places from landing. Not the muscles, but like the knee, the patellar, the Achilles, the low back, and so forth. So it's really important that we are good at landing. I mean, I don't know about you guys, or you personally, but I'm 23. I've gradually gained inches by inches over the past couple of years just by not getting injured. And I'd love to keep that up. I can't get injured. I need to be good at landing. I want to be doing the same dunks I'm doing at 30. And if I get injured, that's going to be a huge problem for that, right? Furthermore, I want to be walking without pain when I'm 50. And in order to do that, I need to have smooth landings. Okay, so there's an accompanying video to this which I recommend checking out, which is me and my training buddy Chandler. We do a bunch of dunks and I analyze strictly the landings, kind of grade them and talk about them with various terminology that I'm going to go over right now. So, briefly to talk about the jumping, 1 foot is similar, but I'm going to be talking about 2 foot. 2 foot, we're jumping from a sideways deadlift. Think about how 2 foot jumpers jump. Sideways deadlift. And basically what that is we're going sideways because it makes our foot shorter but wider. We have a greater sense of balance. We have a wider base than if we do this. We have a really narrow base that's good for balance. And there's various reasons. Faster loading time on our feet is the main thing. Secondarily, if we torque 90 degrees here, rotate 90 degrees here, as most elite jumpers do, although some of you guys may only get to 60 or 70, but I recommend getting the full 90. We're going to continue our torque into the air and rotate about 45 degrees on the way up to dunk and 45 degrees on the way down, which means with a sideways landing, we're landing backwards. And landing backwards is much easier than landing forwards. The reason for that is, much like the deadlift is the position from which we can lift the most, the squat is the position from which we can lower the most. And if you know anything about squat, or if you research anything about squatting, or you talk to anyone about squatting, you're going to know that it's a big problem if your knees go out over your toes, farther over your toes. That's creating a knee ankle that can cause a lot of problems, from a knee explosion to patellar tendonitis. So we want to use our posterior muscles in our squat. We want to be using our glutes, and we want to be using our core, and we want to be hinging at the hip, which means if we're landing backwards and we go into a squat and we have too much momentum, worst case scenario, we roll up onto our back. But if we're landing forward and we're landing in a squat and we have too much momentum, our knees are going way out and we have a chance of a knee explosion. So in general, you want to land backwards if you can. It just makes it easier, and you can check out the video and see how that actually works. Talk about, you don't need to land in a squat necessarily, as there's basically 3 ways to diffuse this force. First of all, some key principles. Silent landing is better because any amount of noise means collision, and silence means diffusion, right? So silence is better. Similarly, if you're just eyeballing the person landing, if you cannot see the ground and you're just watching them, it should be unclear the moment they hit the ground because their landing is so smooth that they just touch down, right? Now, if you can see when they hit the ground visually, that's a problem because it means there's kind of a jarring contact there, right? Okay, well, more principles of landing. Landing is a transference of force, a transference of we're coming down, we're coming forward, and we're rotating. So our landing is going to be a combination of coming down, which is the squat, of rotating, which transference, and of horizontal, which is running, right? So we're going to have three main types of landings. Each has rotational, vertical, and horizontal diffusion, but one might favor one more than the other. So a horizontal or a vertical primary landing is going to look a lot like a squat, which you're going to see in the video. A horizontal primary landing is going to look like reverse lunge or just reverse run, where you're going to hit the ground running, right? And a horizontal landing is you're going to hit the ground, or rotational landing rather, you're going to hit the ground spinning. But the reality is, and it's totally fine to have all of your landings be some kind of combination of hitting the ground, getting good depth in your vertical diffusion, transferring that into horizontal diffusion, or continuing the horizontal force, or rotating as well. So those are basically the main principles of landing, why we should land, and how it goes. And you should check out the second part of the video. One last thing I remembered. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are leaning forward on your landing, that's a bit of a problem. And there's two things you can do here. I mean, you can try to hit the ground running. That's one thing you can do, horizontal transference. It's just harder to get vertical depth. If you want to go for a vertical landing, you want to save your anterior by using your hands on the ground. I call this a cat landing. Your hands are going to be producing the anterior force basically, and you're still going to be using your posterior to go into a squat, but you may be up on your toes and your knees may be out, so it's a little iffy. There's also the calf landing, which you can do if you have to do, and this is the way a lot of people land, which is where you just try to calf raise out of your landing. You get no depth, both your feet hit the ground at the same time, and you try to spring out. I mean, you can get good at that, but you can never get good enough at that it's better than squat landing, right? That's something to be reserved only when something goes wrong. And in training, anytime you see yourself doing that, you should think, why am I doing that? I need to get that out. So, you check out the second part of this video, and for those of you guys who want to jump high and do jump high and train to jump high and haven't thought about landing, if you can, you should tape yourself landing and try to figure out what you're doing. As for how to actually train for this outside of the gym, I've got a video up. I've got a couple of videos up from earlier in the summer of practicing landings outside in the sand. But you do depth drops, rotational depth drops. You step out, rotating, going forward, and trying to land backwards. And what that does is it simulates the rotational, vertical, and horizontal forces and forces you to transfer and diffuse those. So, check it out, man. I want you to keep jumping high. I don't want anyone getting injured out here. Let's do this as long as we can so that we're walking when we're 50. So that's energy efficient basketball.